They say that on a scorching August day in 1943, in the midst of the Sicilian campaign, General George S. Patton suddenly turned up at a forward aid station near the front lines. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and dust, and the groans of the wounded blended with the distant pounding of artillery. Patton, dressed in his crisp uniform and polished helmet, moved among the cots, greeting injured soldiers and asking about their conditions. He had a habit of barking brief, clipped words of encouragement, the way a man might speak when eager to get back into the fight. Then, in full view of horrified onlookers, he encountered a soldier who showed no visible wounds but was suffering profound mental distress, a case of what we would now call combat stress or PTSD. Patton's fury erupted. He called the soldier a coward, struck him across the face, and threatened worse if the man did not return to duty. This shocking incident was later splashed across newspapers, sparking a storm of controversy and nearly destroying Patton's career. Yet it also captured much of who he was: fearless, driven by a near-fanatical belief in discipline and aggression, and unwilling, perhaps even unable, to tolerate any sign of human frailty in the realm of war. To begin unraveling his story, it helps to go back to the late 19th century, when the United States was still grappling with the aftermath of the Civil War. George Smith Patton Jr. was born on November 11, 1885. His family had proudly served the Confederacy, lost nearly everything after the Civil War, and then gradually rebuilt their standing. From an early age, Patton showed a fascination with warfare and regaled family members with boyish fantasies of heroic combat. By his teenage years, he was convinced that a soldier's life was his destiny. But there was a snag. He had not received a traditional elementary education, so he struggled with math and English, subjects deemed essential for admission to West Point. Narrowly, he passed the entrance exams, and once at the academy, his focus and tenacity made themselves felt. Although he was prone to occasional dust-ups with peers, he devoted himself wholeheartedly to athletics, most notably football and polo, showing a fearless, full-throttle approach that left him with more than one broken bone. Some said those early scrimmages on the football field offered a glimpse of how he would one day conduct warfare, always pressing forward, ignoring the risk of injury or defeat, certain of victory. Patton's competitive streak manifested itself at the 1912 Stockholm Olympics, where he represented the United States in the modern pentathlon, an event requiring skill in shooting, fencing, swimming, running, and riding. Although he finished 5th overall, he insisted he might have done better had his bullet holes not passed through the same spot on the target and been mistaken as misses. It was a small but symbolic episode that foreshadowed how he would later handle setbacks, by insisting he had not truly been bested. In 1916, with Europe already aflame in the First World War, Patton got his first taste of active campaigning in a very different theater, the U.S.-Mexico border. The bandit-turned-rebel leader Francisco Pancho Villa led an armed raid into New Mexico, prompting President Woodrow Wilson to send General John Pershing in pursuit. Patton served as Pershing's aide, quickly impressing his commander with a bold automobile raid, often cited as one of the earliest motorized actions in U.S. military history, that left 3 of Villa's close associates dead. The bodies of the slain outlaws were strapped to the vehicles and brought back to headquarters. Pershing, seeing Patton's audacity, reputedly remarked, "This Patton boy is a real fighter." By then, Patton's taste for risk and for mechanized warfare was already evident. When the United States officially entered World War I in 1917, Pershing tapped Patton again, but this time Patton was not content to remain an aide. He was fascinated by the possibilities of tanks, those heavy, rumbling machines that had made their first appearance on the Somme in 1916 under British command. Patton became one of the first American officers assigned to the fledgling tank corps, quickly learning how to drive and operate the early vehicles. They often broke down, overheated, or became easy targets for enemy artillery. But Patton's conviction was that tanks, if used aggressively, could break the stalemate of trench warfare. He personally taught the first crews how to maneuver these iron behemoths. During the Meuse-Argonne offensive of 1918, he was wounded by shrapnel while leading a small contingent to recover stalled tanks, refusing medical treatment until he had dictated a full report from a shell crater. By the time his wounds healed, the armistice had been signed, leaving him with only a short, fierce taste of the front lines, but a reputation for absolute fearlessness. Patton had proven he was not the kind of commander to hide behind lines. He believed in leading from the front, living and nearly dying by example. In peacetime, Patton's life swung in a dramatically different direction, thanks in no small part to his marriage to Beatrice Eyre, heir to a wealthy Boston industrialist. With few financial worries, Patton threw himself into sports, driving fancy cars, sailing a private yacht, and caring for his beloved horses. Yet at the same time, he never abandoned the study of military history or the conviction that tanks would shape the wars of the future. He pored over theories proposed by men like Charles de Gaulle in France and Heinz Guderian in Germany, both of whom argued that an aggressive, mechanized approach would transform modern battlefields. By the early 1940s, Patton had a chance to test such ideas in the massive Louisiana and Carolina maneuvers, where hundreds of thousands of troops and over 1,000 aircraft staged mock battles. Though it was merely an exercise, 61 soldiers died in accidents, an indication of how realistic and large-scale these drills were. Patton emerged from them as arguably the U.S. Army's best exponent of armored warfare, an officer whose instincts favored speed, surprise, and relentless forward motion. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the United States officially entered World War II. Patton's first major campaign was the Allied operation in North Africa in 1942-43, aimed at driving Axis forces from the continent. He commanded the Western Task Force in Operation Torch, landing at Casablanca with 35,000 men. In early clashes, American forces endured a baptism by fire, suffering embarrassing losses in Tunisia against Erwin Rommel, the brilliant German tank commander. At the Kasserine Pass, American morale hit rock bottom, and Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower replaced the disgraced leader with Patton, hoping to install discipline and determination. Patton immediately tightened regulations, banning slack uniforms, demanding strict obedience, and implementing rigorous training. To some, his methods seemed draconian, but they worked. Under his command, American forces held firm, and at El Guitar, they inflicted a defeat on the formidable 10th Panzer Division. Almost overnight, Patton's name became associated with new life for American armored tactics. It was in North Africa that Patton's rivalry with British General Bernard Montgomery began to take root. Montgomery was cautious, favoring long preparation and methodical advances, while Patton was impulsive, itching for aggressive offensives that would keep the enemy constantly off balance. Patton increasingly felt Eisenhower deferred too much to Montgomery's steady-handed style, whereas Patton believed victory often went to those who moved fastest and struck hardest. Their feud intensified during the invasion of Sicily in mid-1943, which was planned so that Montgomery's 8th Army held the primary role, and Patton's 7th Army served in a support function. Patton bristled at this, deciding to interpret his orders in such a way that gave him permission to drive toward the city of Messina, a symbolically crucial objective, faster than the British could get there. He did indeed reach Messina first, reinforcing his reputation for speed and daring. Yet this triumph was overshadowed by the scandal in which Patton struck a soldier suffering from combat stress, sparking widespread outrage and severely damaging his reputation. Journalists were present, and soon enough the press erupted with stories of the assault. Striking a subordinate was a court-martial offense. Eisenhower, desperate to maintain Allied unity, forced Patton to publicly apologize and then quietly removed him from the spotlight. While Patton's methods had jolted U.S. forces out of complacency, his uncontrollable anger threatened his future as a frontline commander. When the Allies shifted focus to Italy, Patton, to his frustration, was sidelined. Worse still, for the critical D-Day invasion of June 1944, he had no direct combat role. Instead, he was used as part of a massive deception plan. The Allies built a fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group under Patton's command, replete with inflatable tanks and dummy encampments, to convince the Germans that the main landing would occur at Pas de Calais. The ruse worked. German forces stayed concentrated in the wrong area, partly because they assumed their most offensive-minded adversary, Patton, would never be left out of the greatest amphibious assault in history. But while D-Day proceeded without him, Patton chafed in England, fearful the war might end before he could re-enter the action. That changed in late July 1944, when American forces in Normandy finally broke through German lines. General Omar Bradley, commanding the U.S. ground forces, knew exactly who was best suited to exploit the breach. He gave Patton command of the newly formed Third Army, a fully motorized and armored corps. Patton wasted no time. He drove his units through a narrow gap in the German defenses and unleashed them on the open countryside beyond, capturing swathes of France with incredible speed. His momentum was so swift that supply lines struggled to keep up with his tanks. Patton once quipped, "My men can eat their belts if they have to, but my tanks gotta have gas." In strategic terms, Germany's entire position in France was put at risk. Adolf Hitler attempted to seize an opportunity by attacking Patton's overextended lines from the flanks, hoping to surround and annihilate the Third Army. But the Germans lacked the resources for such a bold move, and instead they faced near encirclement at Falaise. Patton believed he could close the pocket completely, capturing or destroying large German forces, but Bradley, or possibly Montgomery, hesitated, ordering a halt at Argentan. Patton obeyed, though he believed it was an error that let thousands of German troops escape. The tension between Patton's go-for-broke style and the caution of other Allied leaders only worsened. Nonetheless, American fortunes were rising, and Patton's successes were hard to ignore. Then came the German counteroffensive in the Ardennes in December 1944, known to history as the Battle of the Bulge. The surprise assault rattled many Allied commanders, but Patton saw it differently. "Let those bastards go all the way to Paris if they like," he is rumored to have joked privately. "It'll just make it easier to cut them off and chew them up." When Eisenhower summoned senior officers for an emergency meeting, he asked how soon Patton could turn his Third Army north to relieve the battered American defenders in Bastogne. Patton stunned everyone by responding he could have 3 divisions there in 48 hours. Unbeknownst to them, he had already made arrangements. Staff work had begun, roads were scouted, and units were on alert. Sure enough, within 2 days, elements of the Third Army were rolling into the frozen roads of the Ardennes, providing critical reinforcements that blunted Germany's last major offensive in the West. By early 1945, the Allies were poised to cross the Rhine into the heart of Germany. Montgomery, ever the perfectionist, planned a large crossing operation with an aerial assault and heavy artillery bombardment. Meanwhile, Patton quietly slipped one of his divisions across the river at night, establishing a surprise bridgehead before the Germans fully realized what was happening. He called Bradley, urging him not to leak the information, joking, "Don't tell anyone because the Krauts haven't noticed yet." Montgomery soon launched his own meticulously orchestrated crossing, but Patton had already stolen some of the spotlight. This was a fitting snapshot of Patton at war. Audacious, quick, sometimes regarded as downright reckless, but undeniably effective. With Germany defeated, Patton longed to be sent to the Pacific to continue commanding troops against Japan. Instead, he was appointed military governor of Bavaria. Politics was not Patton's strength. He clashed immediately with Soviet officials, refused to remove former Nazi Party members from administrative roles, and in one disastrous offhand remark to a reporter, compared membership in the Nazi Party to an American choosing whether to be a Democrat or Republican. The press tore him apart, prompting another wave of outrage, and once again Patton was removed from his position. His remarkable military talents were not matched by political instincts. He seemed to create a public scandal wherever he went. Fate, however, had one final twist for George S. Patton. In December 1945, only a few months after the war in Europe ended, he was traveling to a hunting expedition in occupied Germany. His vehicle was struck at low speed by a truck. Everyone else emerged with minor injuries, but Patton's neck was broken, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down. He died 11 days later in a hospital, having never regained full mobility or the opportunity to move on to another command. In a bittersweet final act, he was buried among the men of his beloved Third Army, symbolically remaining with the troops he had led so aggressively through the war. Rumors and conspiracy theories later circulated that he had been assassinated by the Soviets or even his own government because of his outspoken views on the post-war order, but no credible evidence has ever surfaced to confirm such claims. Beyond the controversies, Patton's personal spirituality revealed another intriguing layer. He was a devout Christian, but also claimed to believe in reincarnation, convinced that he had fought alongside Julius Caesar and Napoleon Bonaparte in past lives. He wrote poetry, often spiritual or reflective, and family members recounted that he would sometimes cry at funerals or memorials for fallen soldiers. This softer, more introspective side coexisted with the brash persona of a commander who loved to make dramatic speeches laced with profanity and to brandish custom ivory-handled revolvers at his hips. He was, in a word, complicated. Patton's legacy in military doctrine was profound. He refined the idea of rapid, relentless, armored offensives, an Americanized adaptation of the Blitzkrieg the Germans had used so effectively earlier in the war. Under Patton, the U.S. Army embraced maneuver warfare more fully, deploying tanks en masse to overwhelm the enemy's capacity to react. His insistence on pushing forward, keeping the foe disorganized, saved countless lives on his side, he believed. Critics, on the other hand, pointed out that he exposed his flanks and supply lines to serious danger, and only luck and the crumbling state of the German Wehrmacht prevented catastrophe. Even so, in the decades following World War II, many U.S. officers and war colleges took lessons from Patton's campaigns. He had demonstrated that a commander with flair and imagination could achieve dramatic breakthroughs, provided he had well-trained troops and logistical support. For the troops who served under him, especially in the Third Army, Patton was simultaneously revered and feared. Many veterans said he always pushed them to go further and faster than they thought possible. Yet his presence on the battlefield gave them confidence they might never have felt otherwise. They knew he would personally inspect the front lines, sometimes driving or riding through artillery zones, refusing to cower behind headquarters. That immediate hands-on style of leadership endeared him to many soldiers. At the same time, they also knew that the slightest sign of weakness might provoke one of his infamous tantrums. This dichotomy, devotion blended with apprehension, mirrored the essence of a commander whose victories were overshadowed by his outbursts. In the broader historical landscape, Patton represents a distinct brand of American generalship during the World War II, brash, impatient, and eager to bring the fight directly to the enemy. He made no secret of his frustrations with allies, especially with Bernard Montgomery, whose meticulous plans Patton found suffocatingly slow. That tension between British caution and American aggression was not entirely personal, but rather a reflection of the coalition warfare realities. Still, the stories of their rivalry in North Africa, Sicily, and across France remain a staple of World War II lore. Looking back, perhaps the best way to understand Patton is to see him as a product of an age torn apart by global conflict, an age that demanded extraordinary measures of courage and inflicted extraordinary suffering. World War II created space for men like Patton, whose talents in driving armored spearheads and whipping armies into shape were desperately needed. But as soon as the conflict ended, those same traits, the uncompromising sense of mission, the inability to contain his tongue, became liabilities. He had no easy place in the post-war world of diplomatic alliances, reconstruction efforts, and ideological tensions with the Soviet Union. If that abrupt shift from indispensable commander to political pariah seemed unfair to him, it was also the natural conclusion to a story of a man who found his truest purpose amid the clamor of tank treads and gunfire. For a modern audience, particularly those who have never experienced a global conflict, Patton's life invites serious moral reflection. His campaigns demonstrate how swiftly an armored force can shatter enemy lines, saving lives on one side while inflicting heavy casualties on the other. His personal struggle with the concept of fear reminds us that war is never only about bullets and bombs. It is about psychology, morale, and the fragile well-being of the soldier in the trench. If one believes his self-depiction as a reincarnated warrior, then Patton's story can be seen as a single chapter in a much longer saga of humanity's perpetual conflicts. If one sees him as simply a man shaped by his time, then his story stands as a window into a moment when total war consumed entire nations, demanding leaders who wielded discipline like a blade. And so George S. Patton remains with us, lodged in the collective memory as both a dynamic conqueror of continents and a flawed, passionate individual whose entire being was devoted to the art of war. His story offers no simple moral. Rather, it draws us in with its blend of heroism, short temper, deep faith, and warrior ethos. Perhaps the real significance of Patton's life is that it mirrors our own contradictory longings to excel, to triumph over adversity, yet never to lose our humanity. Reflecting on him, we are reminded that conflicts as vast as World War II are shaped not only by grand strategies, but also by fierce personalities, men and women who carry their own hopes and fears into the fray. In that sense, George S. Patton might endure as a symbol of how war magnifies the strongest virtues and darkest flaws, leaving us to wonder what paths a man of his temperament might have taken if the world had not been plunged into the fires of global conflict. Only by studying his victories and his mistakes do we glimpse the cost of war and the deep human complexities that can lie behind even the most famous of generals.